The dense fog rolled through the ancient pines of Black Ridge Forest, where James Mitchell had hunted for over 2 decades. On this particular morning, something felt different in the air, a heaviness that went beyond the usual autumn mist. Little did he know, his routine hunting trip would lead to a discovery that would unearth long-buried secrets and change not just his life, but the lives of those who had been searching for answers for years. The morning light struggled to pierce through the thick canopy of evergreens as James navigated the familiar paths of his hunting grounds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 23 years of tracking deer through these woods had taught him every creek, every ridge, and every animal trail. The crisp November air bit at his exposed face as he adjusted his worn leather gloves, his trusted Winchester rifle slung comfortably across his back. The forest was quieter than usual, the silence broken only by the soft crunch of frost-covered leaves beneath his boots. James paused to check his GPS coordinates, though he hardly needed to. This particular section of Black Ridge Forest had been his sanctuary since he'd returned from his last tour with the Marine Corps Special Operations Command. The wilderness had helped him find peace when civilian life felt too chaotic, too confined. Every weekend during hunting season, he'd make the hour-long drive from his small cabin in Cedar Valley to these remote hunting grounds, following the same ritual that had become as natural as breathing. The heavy mist created ghostly shapes between the trees, and James found himself squinting to make out potential movement in the early morning gloom. His trained eyes caught sight of fresh deer tracks in the mud. A good-sized buck had passed through recently. In any other circumstance, he would have been focused entirely on following those promising marks, but something else caught his attention. A sound carried on the wind, so faint he might have missed it if not for years of training that had taught him to notice the smallest details. He stood completely still, controlling his breathing the way he'd learned in the Corps. There it was. Again, a sound that didn't belong in these woods. Not the snap of a twig from deer hooves, not the scurrying of small game, but something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. A whimper, barely audible, followed by the distinct, metallic clink of chain against wood. James's hunter's instincts warred with his military training. The deer tracks led east, towards the creek, where he'd had luck in previous seasons. But that sound pulled him north, towards the old fire break that marked the boundary of his usual hunting zone. In 23 years, he'd never had reason to venture beyond that line. The territory beyond was rougher, marked by steep ravines and dense underbrush that most hunters avoided. "Hello?" he called out softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The whimpering stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence that felt heavier than before. James waited, every sense on high alert. After a full minute, another sound reached his ears, a weak bark that made his chest tighten with concern. Slipping his rifle into a ready position, more out of habit than any sense of danger, James began moving carefully through the undergrowth. The fog seemed to thicken around him as he pushed deeper into unfamiliar territory, thorny vines catching at his hunting jacket. The bark came again, stronger this time, guiding him forward. The mist began to thin as he approached a small clearing, and that's when he saw it. An ancient oak tree stood like a sentinel in the center of the space, its massive trunk twisted with age. But it was what was at the base of the tree that made James's breath catch in his throat. Tied to the trunk with what looked like climbing rope was a dog. A German shepherd, its coat matted and dirty, but its eyes alert and intelligent. James had seen enough military working dogs during his service to recognize the bearing of a trained animal. This wasn't some abandoned pet. The dog watched him with an intensity that spoke of assessment rather than fear, its posture remaining steady despite its obvious state of distress. "Easy there, boy," James murmured, slowly lowering his rifle and setting it aside. The dog's ears perked forward at the sound of his voice, but it maintained its position, another trait that screamed of professional training. As James took a careful step forward, his boot caught something half buried in the leaves, a metal bowl, long empty, with strange markings scratched into its surface. The fog had lifted enough now that James could see the dog more clearly. Its ribs showed through its dirty coat, but the muscle underneath spoke of an animal that had once been in peak condition. Moving with deliberate slowness, James reached into his pack for his water bottle and the sandwich he'd packed for lunch. The dog's eyes followed his movements, but it didn't strain against its restraints or show any signs of aggression. "Let's get some water in you first," James said softly, pulling out the collapsible bowl he carried for his own hunting dog back home. As he filled it with water, he noticed something glinting around the dog's neck. His first thought was that it might be a regular collar with tags that could help identify the owner. But as he moved closer, his heart began to pound harder. The dog allowed him to approach, accepting the water with careful discipline, drinking slowly despite its obvious thirst. James used the moment to study what he'd seen around its neck, and what he found made him rock back on his heels in shock. It wasn't a regular collar at all. It was a specialized tactical collar, the kind used exclusively by military working dogs. But it was what was attached to that collar that made his hands begin to shake. Nestled against the material was a set of metal tags, and not the kind you'd find on a civilian pet. These were military identification tags, weathered but still legible. As James carefully brushed away the dirt and grime, the engraved letters began to emerge. His throat went dry as he read the information. This wasn't just any military working dog. The tags told a story that sent his mind reeling back to places and times he'd tried to forget. The dog finished drinking and sat back, maintaining perfect form despite its weakened state. James found himself staring into its eyes, seeing an intelligence and dignity that had survived whatever ordeal had brought it to this remote location. With trembling fingers, he reached out to examine the tags more closely, and what he read there made him sit down hard on the forest floor. The tags were from a specialized unit he knew all too well, Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force, the same unit he'd served with in his last deployment. But it was the name engraved below that designation that made his world tilt on. Its Axis, a name he hadn't heard in 3 years, one that brought back a flood of memories, both triumphant and tragic. K9 Ghost, Handler, Sarah Connor, JSOC Team Echo. Sarah Connor. The name hit him like a physical blow. They'd served together, trained together, survived firefights and sandstorms and endless nights on patrol. She'd been one of the best dog handlers in the unit, and Ghost had been her pride and joy, a dog so exceptional he'd received special commendation for actions that had saved their entire team during a particularly harrowing operation. But 3 years ago, Sarah had disappeared, not in combat, not overseas, but right here in the States. She'd returned from their last deployment, spent 2 months going through the standard debriefing and reintegration programs, and then simply vanished. The official investigation had turned up nothing. Her apartment had been found empty, her phone and credit cards unused. The military police had eventually classified it as AWOL, but James and others who knew her had never believed she'd simply walk away. And now here was Ghost, tied to a tree in the middle of nowhere, wearing his original tags but showing signs of recent care despite his current condition. Someone had been feeding him, at least periodically. The metal bowl proved. But why here? Why now? And most importantly, where was Sarah? James pulled out his phone, his mind racing. There was no cell service this deep in the woods, but he needed to document everything. He took photos of the tags, the rope, the bowl, careful to capture every detail that might be important. Ghost watched him work, occasionally turning his head to scan their surroundings, his training still evident in every movement. The morning had warmed slightly, burning away some of the fog, but James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Ghost's presence here couldn't be a coincidence. The dog had been left where someone with military experience would eventually find him. The area was known locally as a favorite hunting spot for veterans, drawn to its isolation and challenging terrain. As James began working to untie the ropes securing Ghost to the tree, his mind catalogued everything he could remember about Sarah's disappearance. She'd seemed fine during their debriefing, perhaps a bit quieter than usual, but nothing that had raised red flags. It was only later, after she vanished, that some of her fellow handlers had mentioned small changes in her behavior, a new intensity in her eyes, a tendency to check and recheck security measures, long phone calls taken in private. The rope around the tree had been tied with a specialized knot, one taught in advanced military training. James recognized it immediately. He'd used it himself countless times during operations. This was no random act of abandonment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Everything about the situation spoke of purpose, of planning, of a message meant to be found by someone who would understand its significance. Ghost stood as the last rope fell away, shaking himself, but staying close to James's side. Despite his ordeal, the dog's training showed in every movement, alert, disciplined, waiting for commands. James ran his hands carefully over the dog's body, checking for injuries. Besides malnutrition and dehydration, Ghost seemed physically sound, though his coat was matted and would need serious attention. "What happened, boy?" James whispered, more to himself than the dog. "Where's Sarah? What are you trying to tell us?" The morning sun had risen higher, casting long shadows through the trees. James's original plans for a quiet morning hunt felt like they'd happened in another lifetime. He knew he needed to get Ghost to a vet, but he also knew he couldn't simply walk away from this scene. Every instinct, every bit of training told him this was more than a lost dog. This was the first real clue to a mystery that had haunted him and others for 3 years. Carefully, James gathered everything he could find near the tree, the bowl, the ropes, even samples of the knots used. His phone's camera documented every detail, every angle that might later prove important. Ghost watched him work, occasionally whining softly when James handled certain items, as if trying to communicate something beyond words. The weight of the discovery pressed on James's chest. He needed help, the right kind of help. Not just a vet for Ghost, but people who would understand the significance of what he'd found. People who knew Sarah, who knew military working dogs, who could help him piece together what this carefully staged scene was trying to tell them. As if reading his thoughts, Ghost pressed against his leg, offering the kind of steadfast support these incredible dogs were trained to provide. James reached down to pat his head, feeling the strong bond these animals could forge, even in the most difficult circumstances. Whatever had happened to Sarah, whatever events had led to Ghost being tied to this tree, James knew with absolute certainty that he was now part of it. The fog had completely lifted now, revealing a clear autumn morning, but James felt like he was standing on the edge of something far more complex and shadowy than the weather. As he gathered his gear and prepared to lead Ghost back to his truck, he made a silent promise. To Sarah, to Ghost, and to himself. He would unravel this mystery, no matter where it led. The hunter had become something else entirely. A seeker of truths that someone had gone to great lengths to conceal. Ghost fell into step beside him as they began the trek back, moving with the fluid grace of a trained military dog despite his weakened condition. The morning woods seemed different now, charged with purpose and possibility. James's ordinary hunting trip had become the beginning of something extraordinary, and as they made their way through the ancient pines of Black Ridge Forest, he knew his life would never be quite the same again. James's truck was parked nearly 2 miles away, and every step of the journey back required careful consideration. Ghost, despite his military training and obvious strength of will, was weakened from his ordeal. They had to stop frequently, James offering small amounts of water and bits of his sandwich, careful not to overwhelm the dog's deprived system. The autumn sun had risen higher, burning through the last wisps of morning fog. But James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. His mind raced with questions as they made their slow progress through the woods. Why would someone leave a highly trained military dog tied to a tree in such a remote location? The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that this was no random act. Everything about the situation spoke of careful planning. As they walked, James kept one eye on their surroundings and another on Ghost. The dog moved, with the deliberate grace of a trained military animal, occasionally stopping to scan their perimeter just as he would have done on patrol. Despite his weakened state, years of training showed in every movement. When they paused to rest, Ghost maintained tactical positioning, placing himself where he could observe multiple approaches, behavior that spoke of recent reinforcement of his military training. "You're still on duty, aren't you, boy?" James murmured, watching Ghost survey their surroundings. The dog's ears twitched at his voice, but his attention remained focused outward, professional to the core. This wasn't just muscle memory from old training. Someone had been working with Ghost recently, keeping his skills sharp. But why maintain such rigorous training only to abandon him? They were about halfway back to the truck when Ghost suddenly stopped, his head lifting sharply. James immediately froze, years of military and hunting experience taking over. The dog's posture had changed, alert but not aggressive, indicating awareness rather than threat. James scanned the area, noting how Ghost's attention fixed on a particular section of dense underbrush. Moving carefully, James approached the spot that had caught Ghost's attention. The ground here showed signs of recent activity, broken twigs, disturbed leaves, and something else that made his pulse quicken. Half hidden under a fallen log was a small waterproof tactical bag, the kind used to protect sensitive equipment. In the field. It wasn't old or weathered. Someone had placed it here recently. James photographed the bag's position before touching it, his phone's camera capturing every detail. The bag's placement seemed deliberate, just off the most direct route between the old oak tree and the main trail. If he hadn't had Ghost with him, he might have walked right past it. With careful movements, he retrieved the bag, noting its lightweight and the familiar feel of military-grade materials. The bag's zipper was new, moving smoothly as he opened it. Inside, he found a sealed envelope and a small personal recorder, both wrapped in waterproof material. The envelope bore a single word, written in block letters, "Watchman." James's breath caught. It was an old code word from their unit, used to indicate secure information that needed to reach specific personnel. Ghost had moved closer, his nose twitching with interest at the bag. James noticed how the dog's attention focused on the items, another indication that they were connected to his recent past. With trembling fingers, James opened the envelope, finding a single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was tight and controlled, but he could see the slight tremor in some of the lines. "If you're reading this, you found Ghost. That means either my calculations were correct about who would eventually patrol this area, or we got lucky. Either way, time is critical. Ghost knows the signs. Watch him carefully. Everything has been compromised. Trust no official channels. Sarah." James read the note 3 times, his military training kicking in as he analyzed every word. The message was deliberately vague, but clear enough to someone who knew Sarah's background. During their deployment, she'd been known for her attention to detail and ability to plan several steps ahead. This wasn't a hasty message from someone running scared. This was calculated, strategic. The personal recorder felt heavy in his, and as he examined it, it was a high-end model with impressive battery life, the kind that could record for days on a single charge. The device showed signs of careful handling, its surfaces clean despite being hidden in the woods. James pressed play, holding his breath as he waited for Sarah's voice. Instead of voice recordings, the device emitted a series of clicks and pauses, Morse code. James's eyes widened as he recognized the pattern. Their unit had used specialized Morse code variations for secure communications. He quickly pulled out his phone's notepad app, transcribing the signals as they played. Ghost sat perfectly still beside him, his attention focused on the familiar sounds. The message was brief, but chilling. "Echo team compromised, deep cover necessary, Ghost will guide, 72 hours from discovery." The recording ended with another code sequence, one that made James's blood run cold. It was their unit's emergency protocol signal, used only in situations of extreme danger when normal communications were considered unsafe. James checked his phone's clock, marking the time. If the 72-hour countdown began when he found Ghost, they were already several hours in. Whatever Sarah was planning, whatever she needed Ghost to reveal, it had to happen within that window. The urgency of the situation pressed against his chest like a physical weight. Ghost whined softly, pressing against James's leg. The dog's military training was impeccable, but there was something else in his behavior now, a sense of purpose, as if finding the hidden bag had activated some part of his specialized training. James remembered how Sarah used to work with Ghost, training him in complex sequential tasks. The dog wasn't just left here to be found, he was part of whatever plan Sarah had set in motion. Securing the bag and its contents in his pack, James stood slowly, his mind racing. He needed help, but Sarah's warning about official channels couldn't be ignored. During their service together, she'd been involved in sensitive operations, the kind that required the highest security clearances. If she believed those channels were compromised, going to military authorities or local law enforcement could put her at even greater risk. As they resumed their journey back to the truck, James mentally reviewed his options. He needed someone with veterinary expertise to check Ghost's condition, someone who would understand the unique requirements of a military working dog. He also needed secure communications and resources to decode whatever messages Sarah might have embedded in Ghost's training. Most importantly, he needed people he could trust, absolutely. Ghost moved with renewed energy now, as if finding the hidden bag had given him fresh purpose. His tactical training showed clearly as he maintained optimum position relative to James's movement, proving that wherever he'd been these past weeks or months, someone had kept him in working condition. The woods seemed different now, every shadow potentially significant, every broken branch a possible sign. James found himself scanning their surroundings with combat-level awareness, his senses heightened by the growing reality of their situation. This wasn't just about finding an abandoned military dog anymore. This was the beginning of something much larger and potentially dangerous. Approaching his truck, James did a careful perimeter check before leading Ghost to the vehicle. The dog waited for his command before jumping into the back seat, settling into a position that allowed him to watch both forward and rear approaches. James secured his rifle and gear, then paused to make a series of quick phone calls, careful to keep his language casual and unspecific. The first call was to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a veterinarian who'd served as a civilian contractor with military working dog units. She now ran a private practice outside Cedar Valley, maintaining her security clearance and specialized knowledge of handling military-trained animals. James had met her through local veteran support networks, and more importantly, she knew Sarah from consulting on Ghost's previous medical care. "Elena? Jim Mitchell here. Remember that special case you consulted on a few years back? Sarah Connors. Partner. Well, I've got a situation that needs your expertise. No, can't discuss details on the phone. How soon can you meet?" The tension in his voice must have conveyed the urgency because Elena didn't hesitate to clear her schedule. The second call was trickier. Major Marcus Thompson had been their unit's intelligence officer, now retired but still maintaining certain unofficial connections. He lived a few hours away, having chosen the quiet life after his service, but James knew he kept his skills sharp. More importantly, he'd been one of the few people who'd never accepted the official story about Sarah's disappearance. "Marcus." "Yeah, it's James. Listen, remember that discussion we had about Sarah's case? Some new information has surfaced. Think you could pay me a visit? Bring your old field kit if you still have it." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Before Marcus responded with casual agreement, his tone carefully neutral, but understanding the underlying message. As James started the truck, he caught Ghost's reflection in the rearview mirror. The dog sat alert but relaxed, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. In the better light of late morning, James could see more details he'd missed earlier, small scars that weren't documented in Ghost's military records, signs of recent experiences that needed to be understood. The drive back to his cabin would take about an hour, time James needed to organize his thoughts and plan their next moves. Sarah's message indicated they had limited time to act, but rushing blindly could be dangerous. Ghost was more than just a rescued animal. He was now their key to understanding whatever situation had forced Sarah into hiding. Every few minutes, James glanced back at Ghost, still amazed by the dog's composure and discipline. Despite everything he'd been through, he maintained his training, ready to perform whatever tasks Sarah had prepared him for. Military working dogs were exceptional animals, capable of complex behaviors and unwavering loyalty. Ghost wasn't just carrying Sarah's message. He was part of her plan, a crucial piece in a puzzle that was only beginning to take shape. The autumn sunshine filtered through the trees as they drove, creating shifting patterns on the road ahead. James's quiet hunting morning had transformed into something far more complex and potentially dangerous. But as he drove toward his cabin, Ghost's steady presence in his back seat, he felt a surge of determination. Whatever Sarah had discovered, whatever had forced her to take such extreme measures, she'd trusted them to follow her trail of clues. James made a silent promise not to let that trust be misplaced. James's cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by towering pines that provided natural security and privacy. As he pulled up to the familiar structure, he performed A careful scan of the area, noting everything from the undisturbed gravel around the building to the position of the security cameras he'd installed years ago. Ghost's alertness level hadn't changed, suggesting no immediate threats in the vicinity. The cabin itself was modest, but strategically designed, a habit James had never quite shaken from his military days. Every window offered clear sightlines to the surrounding forest, and multiple exit routes were carefully maintained. What had once seemed like paranoid over-planning now felt prescient, given the situation they'd stumbled into. "Clear, boy," James said softly, watching as Ghost, expertly, swept the perimeter before following him inside. The dog's movements were precise, despite his weakened condition, checking corners and sightlines with professional efficiency. James noted how Ghost paid particular attention to certain areas, the kind of spots where surveillance equipment might be hidden. This wasn't random behavior, it was part of his specialized training. Inside, James quickly set up a comfortable spot for Ghost near the fireplace, laying out fresh water and small portions of the high-protein dog food he kept. For his own hunting dog, Ghost waited for permission before eating, another sign of his impeccable training. While the dog ate, James began organizing the evidence they'd collected: the military tags, photographs of the scene, the waterproof bag with its mysterious contents. The morning's events felt surreal as he spread everything across his sturdy oak dining table. Each item seemed to pose more questions than answers. The tactical bag itself was worth examining more closely. It was a model used exclusively by special operations units with a manufacturing date stamp from just 6 months ago. This wasn't old equipment from Sarah's service days. This was new, suggesting she still had access to military-grade supplies. James's phone buzzed, a text from Elena Rodriguez, confirming she'd be there within the hour. Good. Ghost needed professional medical attention, and Elena's experience with military working dogs would be invaluable. The second message was from Marcus, indicating he was already on the road, bringing what they might need. While waiting, James focused on examining the personal recorder more thoroughly. The Morse code message seemed straightforward enough, but Sarah had always been clever about layering her communications. During their service together, she'd developed several methods of embedding additional information within seemingly simple messages. Ghost finished his small meal and moved to sit near James, his posture alert but relaxed. Every few minutes, the dog would perform a casual sweep of the cabin's entry points, doors, windows, the small bathroom window. It was behavior that went beyond standard military working dog training, suggesting recent specialized conditioning. "What are you looking for, boy?" James murmured, watching as Ghost's attention fixed momentarily on the cabin's western window. Following the dog's gaze, James noticed something he'd overlooked, a slight disruption in the natural pattern of pine needles on his windowsill. Moving closer, he found a nearly invisible fiber caught on the rough wood, the same material used in military-grade climbing rope. Someone had been here, recently enough that the evidence hadn't been disturbed by weather. James's pulse quickened as he documented the discovery with his phone's camera. The placement was deliberate, visible only from certain angles. Sarah had always excelled at leaving subtle markers for those who knew where to look. A distinctive engine sound approaching the cabin caught his attention. Ghost's ears perked up, but his body language remained relaxed. He recognized the vehicle. Moments later, Elena's dark blue SUV appeared through the trees, moving carefully along the gravel drive. James watched through the window as she parked, noting how she took in her surroundings before gathering her medical kit from the trunk. Elena Rodriguez hadn't changed much since he'd last seen her. Still moved with the precise efficiency of someone used to working in high-pressure situations. Her dark hair was streaked with more grey now, but her eyes were as sharp as ever as she took in the scene inside the cabin. "James," she nodded, then her attention fixed on Ghost. "Oh my God, it really is him." Her professional demeanour cracked slightly as she knelt to examine the dog. Ghost remembered her, allowing her approach while maintaining his disciplined posture. "Found him this morning tied to a tree in Blackridge Forest," James explained, watching as Elena began her examination. Her hands moved with practiced skill over Ghost's body, checking for injuries and signs of abuse. "He's dehydrated, obviously. Undernourished, but still in working condition," Elena finished, her voice thoughtful. "Someone's been maintaining his training, James. These muscle responses, the way he maintains tactical awareness. This isn't a dog that's been abandoned for long periods. He's been working." She pulled out her medical kit, beginning a more thorough examination. "The dehydration is recent, maybe 3 or 4 days. Before that, he was receiving proper care, good nutrition, regular exercise." Her hands paused. At Ghost's neck, fingers tracing something beneath his thick fur. "James, come look at this." Beneath the tactical collar, barely visible, was a thin line of scarring. Recent, but healed. "Someone performed surgery on him," Elena said quietly, her expression concerned. "Professional work, but not at any authorized facility. I would have heard about it through the military working dog networks." James felt a chill run down his spine. "Could something have been implanted?" Elena nodded slowly. "It's possible. Some units were experimenting with subdermal tracking devices, but this," she gestured to the scar, "this is different. The placement isn't standard protocol." Ghost remained perfectly still during the examination, but his eyes tracked every movement in the cabin. When a particular bird call sounded outside, his head turned sharply toward the western window, the same one where James had found the fibre. Elena noticed too, her hands pausing in their work. "That's not a local species," she said quietly, her eyes meeting James's. The call came again, and this time Ghost stood, moving to the window with purpose. His body language had changed. Alert but not alarmed, as if responding to a known signal. James moved to the window, scanning the tree line. The dense pines revealed nothing obvious, but years of experience told him they were being watched, not threatened. If Sarah was involved, this would be part of her protocol, making sure it was safe to proceed with whatever she had planned. Elena finished her initial examination, providing Ghost with carefully measured portions of specialized rehydration solution. "His vital signs are stable, but I want to do some blood work, and we need to document everything properly. If this does connect to Sarah's disappearance, we'll need medical evidence." "Udry." The sound of another vehicle approaching drew their attention. Ghost's relaxed posture told them it was Marcus before the black pickup truck came into view. The retired intelligence officer had always moved fast when the situation required. Marcus Thompson emerged from his truck, looking every bit the retired rancher he pretended to be, complete with worn jeans and scuffed boots. Only his eyes gave him away, sharp and analytical as they took in every detail of the scene. He carried an old leather duffel bag that James knew contained considerably more than farming tools. "Quite the reunion we're having," Marcus commented, dryly as he entered the cabin, setting his bag down carefully. His expression softened slightly when he saw Ghost. "Hello, old friend. You've been busy, haven't you?" James quickly briefed Marcus on the morning's discoveries while Elena continued her medical work. The intelligence officer listened without interruption, his fingers absently tapping a pattern on the table that James recognized as a unit verification code. Ghost responded to the pattern with a specific head tilt, another piece of specialized Training. "Show me everything," Marcus said when James finished. His weathered hands moved expertly over the items from the tactical bag, examining them with the kind of attention to detail that had made him legendary in their unit. When he reached the personal recorder, he paused, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "This isn't just a recorder," he said finally, turning the device over in his hands. "See these marks on the battery compartment? It's been modified." With practiced movements, he began carefully disassembling the device, revealing custom circuitry hidden within its casing. "Sarah's work," he muttered, more to himself than the others. "She always did love her custom equipment mods." His fingers traced the delicate circuitry. "This isn't just playing Morse code, it's broadcasting something. Very weak signal, probably short range, but definitely active." Elena looked up from her medical notes. Could that explain Ghost's attention to the western window? If he's been trained to respond to whatever signal that device is broadcasting. Marcus nodded slowly. Sarah was working on some experimental training protocols before she disappeared, combining electronic signals with traditional dog handling techniques. It was all very hush-hush. Even I only heard rumors. James remembered conversations with Sarah about pushing the boundaries of what military working dogs could do. She'd been passionate about finding new ways to utilize their incredible capabilities, especially in situations where traditional communications were compromised. Ghost suddenly stood, moving to the cabin's front door with purpose. His posture was alert but not aggressive, the same stance he'd shown when leading them to the hidden tactical bag. Through the window, James caught a glimpse of movement in the trees, too deliberate to be wildlife. "We've got company," he said quietly, reaching for his rifle, but Ghost's body language remained calm, suggesting whatever was happening was part of the plan. The dog looked back at James, then at the door, clearly wanting to be let out. Marcus moved to cover the window, while Elena quickly packed her medical supplies. Years of training kicked in as they established defensive positions, but Ghost's continued calm suggested this was another piece of Sarah's elaborate puzzle. "Trust Ghost's judgment," Elena said softly. Sarah would have made sure he could identify friend from foe. "If he's not alarmed, this is probably the next step." James took a deep breath, then moved to open the door. Ghost stepped out confidently, leading them toward whatever Sarah had planned next. The morning's discovery of a dog tied to a tree had become something far more complex, a carefully orchestrated series of events that was only beginning to unfold. Ghost led them with unwavering confidence through the dense forest behind James's cabin. The autumn afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the ground that made it difficult to spot subtle signs of passage. But the dog's certainty never wavered. James, Elena, and Marcus followed in tactical formation, their military training automatically kicking in despite the years of civilian life. The modified recorder in Marcus's hand emitted a faint signal, barely audible but clearly affecting Ghost's behavior. The dog would pause occasionally, head tilted as if confirming something only he could sense, before continuing on their path. Elena kept a professional eye on Ghost's condition, monitoring how he handled the exertion in his weakened state. "The signal's getting stronger," Marcus murmured, watching the custom readout he'd jerry-rigged to the device. "Whatever Sarah set. Up out here, we're getting closer to it." His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, noting details that most would miss. "These trees have been marked. Very subtle, but definitely intentional." James saw it too once Marcus pointed it out. tiny reflective markers, virtually invisible unless the light hit them just right. They formed a pattern that only made sense if you knew what to look for. Sarah had always excelled at this kind of work, creating systems that appeared random to outsiders but contained clear messages for those trained to recognize them. Ghost suddenly stopped at a large, lightning-struck oak, similar to but distinct from the one where James had found him that morning. The dog's posture changed, becoming more focused, more intent. He circled the tree once, then sat facing a specific point on its trunk, waiting. "This is it," Elena said softly, noting Ghost's behavior. "This is what he was trained to find." James approached the tree carefully, examining the area Ghost indicated. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but as he ran his hands over the bark, he felt it, a slight irregularity in the wood's texture. Pressing carefully, he felt a mechanism give way, revealing a hidden compartment crafted with expert precision. "Sarah's work," Marcus confirmed, examining the craftsmanship. "She had a particular way of designing these drops. Notice how the mechanism only triggers if you apply pressure in exactly the right sequence, prevents accidental discovery." Inside the compartment, they found another waterproof tactical bag, larger than the first. James carefully removed it, noting its significant weight. Ghost maintained his position, obviously trained to guard this location until properly relieved of duty. "We should document everything before opening it," Elena suggested, already pulling out her phone to photograph the scene. "The positioning, the way Ghost responded, it's all potentially important information." James nodded, fighting the urge to immediately examine the bag's contents. Years of training had taught him the value of proper evidence collection. While Elena documented the scene, Marcus swept the area for any additional markers or signals they might have missed. "The signals changed," he reported, studying his modified receiver. "Different frequency now. I think triggering this compartment activated something else." He adjusted some settings on the device, his expression thoughtful. Sarah always liked layered systems, one discovery leading to another, but only if you followed the correct sequence. Ghost's ears suddenly perked up, his attention shifting to somewhere deeper in the forest. A bird call sounded, the same non-native species they'd heard earlier, but this time it came from a different direction. The dog looked at James expectantly, clearly trained for this sequence of events. "She's watching us," James said quietly, scanning the trees. "Or someone is, making sure we're following her protocol correctly." The thought was both reassuring and unsettling. If Sarah had this much infrastructure in place around his cabin, how long had she been planning this? With the scene properly documented, they carefully opened the tactical bag. Inside, they found several items that made Elena gasp softly. A high-end laptop, heavily modified, a set of encrypted hard drives, and most surprisingly, a full set of Ghost's original training documents, including records that had been classified. "This is from our secure database," Marcus said, examining the documents with growing concern. These records were supposed to be unreachable, stored on isolated servers with no outside access. Sarah must have copied them before she disappeared. But why? The answer began to emerge as they examined the documents more closely. Hidden among the standard training records were notations that seemed odd, patterns that didn't quite fit the normal protocol. Sarah had apparently been documenting something else entirely, using Ghost's official records as cover. "Look at these training dates," Elena pointed out, her medical expertise picking up on subtle inconsistencies. "The official records show routine exercises, but the physical demands noted here, they're far beyond standard protocol." She was preparing Ghost for something specific. James spread the documents on a relatively flat rock, creating a makeshift workspace. The laptop would need to be examined in a secure location, but the papers might hold immediate clues. As he studied the records, patterns began to emerge. Locations, dates, and specific training exercises that painted a disturbing picture. "She discovered something," Marcus said finally, his voice grave. "Something big enough to make her go dark. These training modifications, the way she's structured this whole setup, she's using Ghost to transmit information that can't be digitally intercepted." A series of sharp cracks in the distance, branches breaking under deliberate weight, drew their attention. Ghost's posture changed instantly, becoming more alert but not aggressive. The dog moved to position himself between them and the sound, clearly following trained protocols. Multiple people moving through the woods. Marcus observed quietly, his experience reading tactical situations showing clearly. Professional movement. They're trying to be quiet, but they're in a hurry. Elena quickly packed the documents back into the tactical bag, while James and Marcus established defensive positions. Ghost remained focused on the approaching sounds. His behavior suggesting this too was part of Sarah's plan. But plans could go wrong, and none of them had survived as long as they had by taking unnecessary risks. The bird call sounded again, closer this time, followed by a sequence of sounds that made Ghost's ears perk up. The dog looked at James, then back toward the sounds, his body language communicating that this was expected, part of his training. "Another signal pattern," Marcus confirmed, checking his modified receiver. "More complex than the others, some kind of authentication sequence?" Before anyone could respond, a figure emerged from the trees. A woman wearing tactical gear that had been expertly modified for woodland movement. She moved with military precision, but held her hands clearly visible, showing she wasn't an immediate threat. Ghost's tail wagged slightly, suggesting he recognized her. "Captain Lisa Chen," she announced calmly, using proper military protocol. "I served with Sarah in advanced special operations. She said you'd find Ghost today." Her eyes moved to the tactical bag they'd discovered. "I see you found the first package. We need to move. Our window of security is limited." James studied her carefully, remembering Sarah mentioning Elisa during their service, someone she'd worked with on classified projects. Ghost's reaction to her provided some validation, but caution was still warranted. "Prove you knew Sarah," he challenged, maintaining his defensive position, "something that wouldn't be in any official record." Lisa's expression softened slightly. She named Ghost herself after finding him half dead in a ghost town during a sandstorm, nursed him back to health before he was officially admitted to the program. It's not in his records because it would have disqualified him. Military, working dogs are supposed to be sourced through official channels only. The detail was exactly the kind of thing Sarah would have kept private, personal enough to be meaningful, but also revealing of her tendency to bend rules when she believed in something strongly enough. Ghost's continued relaxed posture around Lisa provided additional confirmation. "We're running out of time," Lisa continued, her tone urgent but controlled. "Sarah's surveillance network has picked up unusual movement patterns. We need to get you and the package to a secure location for proper briefing." Elena stepped forward, her medical training asserting itself. "Ghost needs rest and continued medical care. He's stable but still recovering from significant stress." Lisa nodded. "We have facilities prepared." Sarah was very specific about Ghost's care requirements. "But we need to move now. Her last communication suggested others have picked up the trail." Marcus studied the surrounding woods with experienced eyes. "More movement out there. Professional patterns. If we're going to move, it needs to be immediately. James looked at Ghost, who remained focused but calm in Lisa's presence. The dog had led them this far, following Sarah's carefully planned sequence of events. Everything about the situation suggested this was the next step, but it also meant committing themselves to whatever Sarah had discovered, whatever had made her go dark 3 years ago. "Ghost," James said firmly, using the command tone that military working dogs were trained to respond to. "Check." The dog immediately went to Lisa, performing a specific sequence of inspection behaviors that were part of his advanced training. His response to her was positive but professional, exactly what you'd expect with someone he knew but wasn't his primary handler. "We'll need to take separate routes," Lisa said, accepting Ghost's inspection as standard protocol. "I have a team establishing a secure perimeter, but we should assume we're being observed." Sarah left specific instructions for this scenario. The sound of distant vehicles reached them, still far off, but approaching along the logging roads that wound through this part of the forest. Lisa's expression tightened slightly. "That's not our people," she said quietly. "Sarah's surveillance network is picking up multiple vehicles, moving in coordinated patterns. Professional search teams." James made a quick decision. They'd come too far to back out now, and Sarah's elaborate planning suggested something far more significant than a simple disappearance. Ghost's entire demeanor supported Lisa's legitimacy, and in situations like this, trusting a military working dog's instincts often meant the difference between success and failure. "Lead the way," he said to Lisa, gathering their discoveries. "But Ghost stays with me." Lisa nodded, unsurprised by the condition. "Sarah said you'd say that. We have 3 separate routes mapped out. The dog will know which ones are safe. Sarah made sure his training covered every contingency." As if to confirm her words, Ghost moved to the head of their group, alert and purposeful. Whatever Sarah had discovered, whatever had caused her to create this elaborate system of clues and signals, they were now committed to seeing it through. The mystery that had begun with a dog tied to a tree was about to become something much larger and more complicated than any of them had imagined. The forest had transformed from a peaceful hunting ground into a tactical environment as they moved. Through the deepening afternoon shadows, Lisa led them along a carefully planned route, using natural features for cover, while Ghost ranged ahead, checking their path with military precision. The sound of vehicles had grown more distant, but James could tell from the dog's body language that they weren't alone in these woods. Sarah mapped everything within a 20-mile radius, Lisa explained, as they navigated a particularly dense section of undergrowth. Created a network of safe routes, supply caches, and observation points. She spent months setting it up, all while staying completely off the grid. Marcus, bringing up the rear of their group, monitored their electronic signature with modified equipment from his bag. "We're being tracked," he reported quietly. "Multiple frequencies. Some military grade, others. I've never seen patterns like these." Elena kept close to Ghost, monitoring his condition as they moved. The dog showed no signs of fatigue despite his recent ordeal, operating on training and adrenaline. "His recovery is remarkable," she observed. "This level of performance after what he's been through, Sarah must have conditioned him for exactly this scenario." They paused briefly in a natural depression, using a fallen tree for cover while Lisa checked her communications device, a highly modified tablet that seemed to be receiving data from multiple sources. "Sarah's surveillance network is picking up increased activity on the eastern access roads. They're establishing a search grid." James studied their surroundings, years of military experience combining with his knowledge of these woods. "They'll Focus on the obvious routes first. Logging roads, game trails. But there's an old flood channel about half a mile west. It's not on any recent maps." Lisa nodded, unsurprised. Sarah knew about it. "It's part of our exit strategy, but we need to make one more stop first." She looked at Ghost, who sat alert but calm, clearly aware of their next objective. "There's another cache point ahead. Critical information that Sarah couldn't risk storing anywhere else." The group moved out again, maintaining tactical spacing as they worked their way through the forest. Ghost led them confidently, occasionally pausing to check specific locations, places where Sarah had left markers that only the dog could detect. The level of planning involved was staggering, suggesting whatever Sarah had discovered was significant enough to warrant extraordinary measures. "Multiple heat signatures ahead," Marcus warned, checking a compact thermal scanner. "Holding position, professional spacing. They're setting up a containment pattern." Lisa consulted her tablet, her expression grim. "They're ahead of schedule. Sarah's models didn't predict this level of response for at least another 12 hours. She turned to James. "We need to split up. Ghost knows alternate routes to the cache point, but we need to divide their attention." Elena immediately shook her head. "Ghost needs to stay with someone who can monitor his condition. He's strong, but he's still recovering." "I'll take Ghost," James decided. "Elena, you go with Lisa. Your medical knowledge needs to reach the secure facility. Marcus?" "I'll create some electronic noise." The intelligence officer smiled grimly, patting his bag of modified equipment. "Give them something to chase." Lisa quickly shared coordinates for their eventual rendezvous point, using a complex code system that Sarah had apparently established. Ghost watched the exchange with focused attention, clearly recognizing elements of his training being put into action. 30 minutes, Lisa said firmly. "If anyone doesn't make the rendezvous, proceed." To the secondary location, Sarah was clear about not compromising the entire operation for any single element. They split up smoothly, years of training making the separation efficient and professional. Marcus headed east, already activating devices that would create misleading electronic signatures. Elena and Lisa took a route that led northwest, using the terrain to mask their movement. James and Ghost waited until the others were clear before starting their own carefully planned route to the cache point. "All right, boy," James whispered, checking his compass. "Show me what Sarah taught you." Ghost moved with renewed purpose, leading James through gaps in the forest's undergrowth that would have been impossible to spot without the dog's guidance. They maintained a steady pace, avoiding obvious paths, while Ghost occasionally checked specific locations, places where Sarah had left markers that only he could detect. The afternoon light was starting to fade when Ghost's behavior changed subtly. His movements became more focused, more deliberate, indicating they were approaching something significant. James heard distant voices carried on the wind, search teams coordinating their movements, but Ghost led them confidently through a series of natural features that kept them hidden from view. They came to a stop at what appeared to be a random point in the forest, but James knew better. Ghost's body language was too specific, too trained. The dog moved to a particular fallen log, weathered by years of exposure, but positioned in a way that now seemed suspicious to James's experienced eye. "Check," James commanded softly, and Ghost immediately began a specific pattern of movement around the log. The dog's training was incredible. Even after everything he'd been through, he performed the sequence perfectly, indicating exactly where James needed to focus his attention. The log had been hollowed out with expert precision, its cavity accessible only if you knew exactly where to apply pressure. Inside, James found another tactical package, this one smaller but somehow feeling more significant than the others. As he carefully removed it, he noticed something else, a small camera, professionally camouflaged, positioned to observe anyone who might discover this location. Ghost suddenly stiffened, his ears forward, body alert but not aggressive. James froze, recognizing the dog's signal for nearby movement. Through the trees, he caught glimpses of tactical gear, search teams moving in organized patterns, sweeping the area with professional thoroughness. They needed to move, but Ghost remained focused on the log. There was something else here, something they hadn't yet discovered. James trusted the dog's training, quickly but carefully examining the log again. This time he found it, a second compartment, even better hidden than the first. Inside was a single envelope, sealed with the material James recognized from his special operations days, designed to destroy its contents if opened incorrectly. The marking on the envelope made his breath catch. Ghost Protocol Omega, Handler, Eyes Only. The search teams were getting closer. James could hear their communications now, professional and coordinated. Ghost looked at him expectantly. They had what they came for, and the dog was ready to lead them out. Years of training and instinct warred in James's mind as he made a quick decision. Carefully securing both packages, James gave Ghost the signal to move. The dog led them away from the log, using a route that seemed random, but was clearly part of his training. They moved silently through the deepening shadows, Ghost's incredible abilities guiding them through gaps in the search pattern. They were halfway to the rendezvous point when Ghost suddenly changed direction, moving with urgent purpose. James followed, trusting the dog's training and instincts. The sounds of the search teams had faded, but new noises reached them, the subtle indicators of someone trying very hard to move quietly through the forest. Ghost led them to a dense thicket, naturally concealed from multiple angles. The dog's behavior shifted again, becoming more focused, more intent. This wasn't just evasion. They were approaching something else Sarah had prepared. The thicket concealed a natural depression in the ground, and within it, James found evidence of recent activity. Fresh dirt had been carefully replaced, natural forest debris arranged to hide any signs of disturbance. Ghost indicated a specific spot, and James understood. This was another cache point, one perhaps even more sensitive than the others. Working quickly but carefully, James excavated the hidden package. This one was different. A hardened case designed for extreme conditions, its surface covered in warnings about proper handling procedures. Ghost maintained security, monitoring their surroundings while James documented everything with his phone's camera. The case required specific pressure points to be activated simultaneously, a security measure that would be almost impossible to discover without proper knowledge. Inside, James found something that made his military experience scream warnings. A specialized data drive, the kind used for the highest levels of classified information, and a handwritten note in Sarah's distinctive writing. If you're reading this, everything else has been compromised. Ghost will know when it's time. Trust his training. Sarah. The note's implications were staggering. Sarah hadn't just disappeared. She'd orchestrated an elaborate contingency plan, using Ghost as both messenger and guardian. The dog's recent ordeal, being tied to that tree where James would find him, wasn't an abandonment, but the activation of this protocol. A series of sharp cracks, branches breaking under hurried movement, snapped James back to their immediate situation. Ghost was already moving, taking up a defensive position that suggested approaching threat. The search teams had changed pattern, responding to something. Perhaps Marcus's electronic distractions had worked too well, drawing more attention to this area. James secured the case and gave Ghost the signal to move. They needed to reach the rendezvous point, but more importantly, they needed to ensure these discoveries reached the right people. Sarah's elaborate preparations, the classified drive, Ghost's specialized training, all of it pointed to something far more significant than a simple disappearance. As they moved through the darkening forest, James's mind raced with possibilities. Sarah had been involved in highly classified operations, the kind that officially didn't exist. Ghost's advanced training had made him more than just a military working dog. He was now a crucial link in an intelligence operation that had been years in the making. The rendezvous point was still 10 minutes away, assuming they could maintain their current pace. Ghost led them through increasingly complex routes, sometimes doubling back or using terrain features in ways that seemed counterintuitive, but clearly served to break any potential pursuit. Through breaks in the canopy, James caught glimpses of the evening sky, clouds moving in, promising rain that could either help or hinder their movement. Ghost seemed to factor this into his pathfinding, leading them along routes that would remain passable even in deteriorating weather. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance added urgency to their movement. This was no longer just a ground search. Someone had escalated the response significantly. Ghost's training showed in how he adapted, using the increasing noise to mask their own movement while staying under the dense canopy. As they approached the rendezvous coordinates, Ghost's behavior indicated they weren't the first to arrive. The dog's body language was relaxed, but alert. Others from their team had made it. James felt a surge of relief, knowing that splitting up had been a calculated risk. The next phase would be crucial. Whatever Sarah had discovered, whatever had caused her to create this elaborate system of caches and codes, it was clear that Ghost was essential to unraveling the mystery. The dog wasn't just carrying information, he was part of an intricate plan that was only beginning to reveal itself. The rendezvous point turned out to be a cleverly concealed natural cave formation, its entrance hidden behind a cascade of thick vines and moss. Lisa had already established a temporary command center inside, using equipment that reflected Sarah's meticulous planning. Eleanor was treating Marcus for a minor leg wound he'd received while creating his electronic diversion, but the intelligence officer's satisfied grin suggested his mission had been successful. "They're chasing shadows across 3 counties," Marcus reported as James and Ghost entered the cave. "Called in some serious resources too. Military-grade surveillance equipment, satellite coverage, the works." He winced slightly as Elena cleaned his wound. "Whoever they are, they're not just some random search team." Lisa was working with multiple devices, monitoring various feeds and signals. "Sarah's surveillance network is picking up encrypted communications we can't crack, different from standard military or intelligence protocols." She looked up as Ghost approached her position, but that's exactly what she expected. The dog moved purposefully through the cave, checking specific points as if confirming locations he'd been trained to recognize. James watched Ghost's behavior carefully, noting how the dog paid particular attention to certain areas. "This isn't the first time he's been here, is it?" "Sarah used this location as one of his training sites," Lisa confirmed. "She spent months working with him, establishing protocols and responses for dozens of scenarios. This cave was set up as a primary coordination point, hardened against electronic surveillance, multiple escape routes, sustainable for extended periods if necessary." Elena finished treating Marcus's wound and moved to check Ghost's condition. "His stamina is remarkable. The training Sarah put him through must have been incredibly intensive." She ran her hands expertly over the dog's body, checking for any signs of stress or injury. The surgery scar is definitely recent, professional work, but not performed at any official facility. James shared his discoveries from their separated journey, carefully laying out the sealed envelope and hardened case. Lisa's expression tightened as she saw the classified markings. This is higher level than anything we expected to find. Sarah was involved in some sensitive operations, but this, she gestured to the warnings on the case, this is beyond even my clearance. Marcus examined the case with expert eyes. Custom security measures, very sophisticated, the kind of thing used for information that officially doesn't exist. He looked at Ghost, who sat alertly nearby, and Sarah trained him to lead us specifically to this. The sound of distant helicopter rotors reminded them of their precarious situation. Lisa checked her monitoring equipment. Search patterns are shifting. They're starting to focus on this general area. Sarah's models predicted this response timeline almost exactly. We need to understand what we're dealing with, James said, carefully opening the sealed envelope using the precise technique required. Inside, he found a single page covered in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, along with what appeared to be a series of code sequences. 3 years ago, he read aloud, I discovered something during a routine security audit. Patterns that didn't make sense, transactions that shouldn't exist. Someone was using our highest-level military working dog programs as cover for something else, something that went beyond any authorized operation. The group listened intently as James continued reading. The more I dug, the worse it got. Shell companies, black budgets, training facilities that existed on paper, but not in reality. Ghost was one of the few genuine dogs in a program that had been corrupted into something else entirely. They realized I was getting close, so I had to disappear. But disappearing wasn't enough. I needed proof, and I needed a way to get that proof to people who could act on it. Lisa's hands had stilled on her equipment. That explains the elaborate preparation, the multiple caches, the sophisticated surveillance network. She wasn't just hiding, she was building a case. Ghost was the key, Elena realized, looking at the dog with new understanding. A legitimate military working dog with documented history and proven reliability. The perfect messenger because no one would suspect. A subtle change in Ghost's posture interrupted her thought. The dog's attention had shifted to one of the cave's secondary entrances, his body language alert but not alarmed. Moments later they heard it too, movement approaching but with a pattern that Ghost clearly recognized. 2 figures emerged from the darkness, moving with the kind of precision that spoke of extensive training. The first was a woman in her early 50s, her grey hair cut short in a military style, wearing civilian hiking gear that didn't quite hide her tactical equipment. The second was a younger man carrying specialized communications gear, his movements suggesting special operations background. Colonel Patricia Martinez, the woman introduced herself crisply. Sarah's former commanding officer. This is Tech Sergeant David Chen. We've been monitoring your progress since Ghost was discovered. This morning, James and the others maintained defensive positions despite Ghost's relaxed attitude toward the newcomers. The dog's training would include recognizing authorized personnel, but caution was still warranted. Prove you knew Sarah, Lisa challenged, using the same security protocol they'd established earlier. Colonel Martinez's expression softened slightly. She came to me first, 3 years ago, when she discovered the irregularities. I advised her to gather more evidence before we took action. 2 days later, she disappeared. A decision I didn't. understand until I found my own investigation blocked at every level. Ghost approached the colonel, performing a specific sequence of inspection behaviors before sitting calmly at her feet. Martinez nodded in approval. Sarah trained him to recognize various authority levels. My presence here means we've reached a critical phase in her protocol. The tech sergeant set up his equipment quickly, establishing secure communications through channels that bypassed conventional networks. Sarah's surveillance system is picking up increased activity. Multiple agencies, some operating without proper authorization. They're closing in on this location. Colonel Martinez moved to examine the hardened case and its contents. This is what Sarah died to protect. The words hit the group like a physical blow. James felt his chest tighten. Died? When? How? 2 weeks ago, Martinez said grimly. She contacted me through an emergency channel, said everything was ready, that Ghost would activate the final protocol. 24 hours later, her safe house was hit by a team that shouldn't have existed. She managed to trigger her contingency plan before... The colonel's voice hardened. Before they reached her. Elena moved closer to Ghost, her hand resting protectively on the dog's shoulder. That explains the surgery, the recent changes in his care. She was preparing him for this, making sure he could complete the mission even without her. The tech sergeant's equipment suddenly emitted a series of alerts, multiple teams converging on our location. Different agencies, but coordinated movement. Someone's putting together the pieces. Colonel Martinez straightened, every inch the commanding officer. Sarah knew this would happen. That's why she established the response timeline. Why she trained Ghost for multiple contingencies. She turned to James. She also knew you would be the one to find him. Your hunting patterns, your military background, your history with the unit. It wasn't coincidence. James thought back to that morning, to finding Ghost tied to that tree. What had seemed like abandonment had actually been the carefully planned activation of an elaborate protocol. Sarah's final mission, orchestrated down to the smallest detail. Ghost knows the next phase, Martinez continued, watching as the dog moved to a specific position in the cave. Sarah trained him to recognize when certain conditions were met. The discovery of the caches, the timing of various elements, the convergence of specific individuals. It's all part of a sequence that only he knows completely. The sound of helicopters was getting closer, accompanied now by the distant rumble of vehicles moving through the forest. Their time was running out, but Ghost's calm demeanor suggested this too was part of the plan. The information in that case, Marcus said, gesturing to the classified drive, it's not just about the corrupted dog program, is it? Martinez shook her head. It's evidence of something much bigger. A shadow operation using military working dog programs as cover for unauthorized activities. Training facilities repurposed for something else. Dogs that existed on paper but never in reality. Their documentation used to hide other operations. Operations that got Sarah killed, Lisa added quietly. Operations that she died exposing, Martinez corrected, and now we have what we need to finish what she started. But first, we need to get that evidence to the right people, people who can't be compromised, who have the authority to act on it. Ghost suddenly stood, moving toward one of the cave's lesser-known exits. His body language had changed, becoming more focused, more urgent. Whatever timeline Sarah had established, they were reaching a critical point. "We move in 3 minutes," Martinez ordered, her tone booking no argument. "Sarah's final protocol is in motion. Ghost will lead us through the next phase, but we need to be ready for anything. They know we have something, even if they don't know exactly what it is." As the group quickly prepared to move, James watched Ghost, standing alertly by the exit. The dog wasn't just carrying out training now. He was completing Sarah's final mission, honoring the handler who had prepared him for this moment, even at the cost of her own life. The forest outside had grown dark, but Ghost's training would account for that. Somewhere in these woods was the next piece of Sarah's elaborate puzzle, and with it perhaps the justice she had died trying to achieve. The simple act of finding a dog tied to a tree that morning had led them into something far larger and more dangerous than any of them had imagined, but there was no turning back now. Sarah's final protocol was in motion, and Ghost would see it through to the end. The night had transformed the forest into a maze of shadows and subtle movements, but Ghost led them with unwavering confidence through paths that seemed to exist only in his trained memory. The group moved in tactical formation, with Colonel Martinez and James flanking Ghost, while the others maintained security positions. The sounds of the search teams had become more organized, suggesting a coordinated effort to tighten their perimeter. "They're using thermal imaging," Tech Sergeant Chen reported quietly, monitoring his specialized equipment. Multiple drones, advanced sensor packages. Whatever Sarah discovered, they're pulling out all the stops to contain it. Eleanor, moving close to Ghost, noticed how the dog consistently chose routes that kept them under the densest canopy coverage. "This isn't random," she observed. "Sarah trained him specifically for thermal evasion. Look at how he uses natural terrain features to mask our heat signatures." Martinez nodded grimly. "Sarah knew exactly what we'd be up against. She spent months mapping thermal shadows, areas where the forest canopy and underground water features would help mask movement from aerial surveillance." They paused briefly in a natural depression, using the moment to check their bearings and assess their situation. Ghost maintained his alert but calm demeanor, suggesting they were still within parameters of Sarah's planned protocol. James studied their surroundings, noting how the dog had led them through a series of locations that seemed random but clearly served specific purposes. The corrupted dog program was just the beginning, wasn't it? He asked Martinez quietly. Sarah found something bigger. The colonel's expression hardened. Much bigger. The program wasn't just falsifying records for non-existent dogs. It was creating cover for unauthorized operations. Black sites disguised as training facilities. Transport missions that never actually carried animals. Budgets that disappeared into shells within shells. Lisa, who had been monitoring Sarah's surveillance network through her modified tablet, suddenly stiffened. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north, heavy equipment, professional drivers using tactical movement patterns. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," Marcus observed, checking his own instruments. "These are military-grade units operating without proper authorization on domestic soil. Someone's desperate enough to risk exposure." Ghost's ears suddenly perked forward, his body language shifting subtly. The dog moved to Martinez, performing a specific sequence of behaviors that clearly meant something to the colonel. Her eyes widened slightly as she watched Ghost's precise movements. "This is it," she said softly. "The final phase of Sarah's protocol. Ghost isn't just leading us away from pursuers. He's taking us to something specific." She looked at James. Sarah knew they'd find her eventually. This was her insurance policy, her way of making sure the truth couldn't be buried. The dog led them deeper into the forest, using routes that seemed to defy the logical grid pattern someone would use to search the area. Every so often Ghost would pause, checking specific locations that meant nothing to the others, but clearly served as confirmation points in his training. "The surgery," Elena said suddenly, her medical mind putting pieces together. "The recent Operation Ghost underwent. Sarah wasn't just implanting tracking devices or medical monitors, was she? Martinez shook her head. No. She needed a way to ensure critical information could never be intercepted electronically, something that could only be accessed under very specific circumstances, following protocols that only Ghost would know completely. The implications were staggering. Sarah hadn't just trained Ghost to lead them to physical locations. She'd made him an integral part of a complex security system, one that couldn't be hacked or compromised because its full parameters existed only in the dog's trained responses. Their movement through the forest had become more purposeful now, with Ghost leading them toward what appeared to be an old quarry area. The site had been abandoned decades ago, nature slowly reclaiming the man-made cuts in the earth. But as they approached, James noticed subtle signs that not everything here was as abandoned as it appeared. Sarah repurposed this entire area, Martinez explained, noting James's observations. Used the quarry's existing infrastructure to create a secure facility right under everyone's nose. The satellite imagery shows an abandoned industrial site, but underground. They reached what appeared to be a collapsed mine entrance, its timber supports long rotted away. Ghost moved directly to a specific section of the collapse, his behavior indicating this was a trained destination. Tech Sergeant Chen's equipment suddenly came alive with readings. Multiple power sources active below ground, he reported, studying his displays. Sophisticated shielding, too. You'd never detect it without knowing exactly what frequencies to scan. Ghost began a specific sequence of movements, checking various points around the apparent collapse. Each location he indicated revealed subtle signs of recent activity, signs that would mean nothing to anyone who hadn't been specifically trained to recognize them. Sarah established this as her fallback position, Martinez said, watching Ghost work, a secure location where she could compile and protect everything she'd discovered. The official records show this entire area was condemned after geological surveys found instabilities in the rock formation. But the surveys were falsified, Marcus guessed, his intelligence experience filling in the gaps. Part of the cover-up, she discovered. Martinez nodded. The same shadow operation that was using the dog program as cover also arranged for this area to be officially abandoned. They needed remote locations for their unauthorized activities. Sarah turned their own deception against them. Ghost suddenly stopped his pattern, sitting alertly beside what appeared to be a jumble of fallen rocks. His posture was exact, indicating this was the precise location his training had been building toward. James approached carefully, examining the area Ghost had indicated. "It's here," he said quietly, finding subtle markers that only someone with military experience would recognize. "Some kind of access point?" The colonel moved forward, her expression focused. "Sarah would have built in multiple layers of security. Ghost's presence is only the first key. There will be others, fail-safes to ensure that even if someone found this location, they couldn't access it without following the exact protocol." The sound of helicopters had grown closer, accompanied by the more disturbing sound of heavy vehicles moving through the forest with purpose. Their window of opportunity was shrinking rapidly. "Multiple teams converging," Lisa reported, checking her tablet. "They've figured out the pattern of our movement. We've got maybe 15 minutes before they have this area completely contained." Ghost remained perfectly still, watching as Martinez and James examined the apparent rockfall. The dog's training was incredible. Even after everything they'd been through, he maintained absolute focus on his mission. Elena kept a close eye on his condition, knowing that this level of performance was demanding even for a dog in peak condition. "Here," Marcus said suddenly, his trained eye catching something the others had missed. A section of the rock face that appeared natural, but showed subtle signs of modification. This isn't just an access point, it's part of a larger system. Martinez nodded grimly. Sarah wouldn't have relied on a single entry point. This whole area is probably honeycombed with passages and security checkpoints. Ghosts training would include knowing which ones are safe, which ones are monitored, and which ones might be compromised. The dog suddenly stood, moving to a specific position relative to the rock face. His behavior had changed, becoming more focused, more urgent. This wasn't just another checkpoint in his training. This was something crucial to Sarah's final protocol. "Look at his posture," Elena observed. "This is different from his other trained responses. Whatever Sarah prepared him for, this is something unique." James watched as Ghost began a precise sequence of movements, checking specific points around the apparent collapse. Each location the dog indicated revealed subtle signs of recent activity, signs that would mean nothing to anyone who hadn't been specifically trained to recognize them. "She built redundancy into everything," Martinez explained, watching Ghost work. "Multiple layers of security, multiple ways to verify authenticity. The dog's training is just one part of a complex system designed to ensure that only the right people could access what she discovered." The sound of branches breaking nearby brought them all to alert. Ghost's posture remained calm but focused, suggesting this too was within parameters of his training. The dog moved to a specific position, clearly waiting for the next phase of whatever protocol Sarah had established. "We need to move," Lisa urged, her equipment showing multiple teams closing in. "Whatever Sarah left here, we have to access it now." Martinez nodded grimly. "Ghost knows the sequence. Everything Sarah discovered, everything she died protecting, it's all here. But we have to follow her protocol exactly, or we risk losing it all." The dog's training had brought them to this moment, this precise location, where Sarah had hidden the truth she'd died to protect. As the sounds of pursuit grew closer, they prepared to take the final steps in a plan that had been years in the making. The simple act of finding a dog tied to a tree that morning had led them into something far larger and more dangerous than any of them had imagined. But now, with Ghost's unwavering guidance, they were about to uncover exactly what Sarah had discovered, and why someone had been willing to kill to keep it hidden. Ghost's trained movements revealed a sophisticated access system hidden within the apparent rock collapse. What looked like natural erosion patterns were actually carefully disguised markers, each one requiring specific verification before the next would become visible. The dog moved through the sequence with practiced precision, demonstrating the incredible complexity of Sarah's security protocols. "Multiple approaching signatures," Tech Sergeant Chen warned, his equipment picking up movement through the forest. "They're using a coordinated search pattern now, professional teams closing in from 3 directions." Colonel Martinez watched Ghost's movements intently, recognizing elements of advanced military protocols in the dog's behavior. "Sarah combined different security systems," she explained as Ghost checked another marker. "Each step requires specific verification, but the complete sequence only exists in Ghost's training. Even if someone found this location, they couldn't access it without him." James studied the rock face as Ghost's actions slowly revealed its secrets. What had appeared to be random geological features began to show subtle patterns, markers, that would be meaningless unless you knew exactly what to look for. Elena kept close to the dog, monitoring his condition as he worked through the complex series of trained responses. "The surgical scar," she said suddenly, watching Ghost perform. "A particularly precise movement. Sarah wasn't just implanting tracking devices. She needed a way to ensure certain information couldn't be intercepted electronically. Marcus nodded grimly, his intelligence experience filling in the implications. Biometric verification, ghosts, physical responses, combined with whatever she implanted, it's a living security key, one that can't be hacked or duplicated because it requires both the implant and his specific trained behaviors. Lisa's surveillance equipment suddenly showed new alerts. Vehicle movement on the old quarry access roads. Heavy equipment moving. With purpose, they're not trying to stay hidden anymore. Ghost completed another sequence, then sat in a precise position relative to a specific section of rock. His posture was exact, indicating this was a crucial point in his training. Martinez moved forward carefully, examining the area the dog had indicated. "Here," she said quietly, her fingers finding nearly invisible seams in the rock face. Sarah used the quarry's original infrastructure, but modified it with technology that shouldn't exist. This isn't just a hiding place. It's a secure facility disguised as an abandoned mine. The sound of helicopter rotors grew closer, accompanied by the more disturbing rumble of heavy vehicles moving through the forest. Their window of opportunity was shrinking rapidly. Ghost remained perfectly still, clearly waiting for the next phase of his trained protocol. "Multiple teams converging," Chen reported, checking his instruments. "Different agencies, but coordinated movement. Someone's directing this from above normal channels." Martinez nodded grimly. "The same people who tried to bury what Sarah discovered. The shadow operation using military dog programs as cover. It goes higher than anyone suspected." She turned to James. "This is why Sarah chose you to find Ghost. Your background, your experience, she knew you'd understand what had to be done." Ghost suddenly shifted position, responding to some signal only he could detect. His movement revealed another aspect of the hidden entrance, a sophisticated locking mechanism disguised as natural rock formations. The dog's training had led them to this moment, but accessing what lay beyond would require precise timing and coordination. "Sarah built this facility piece by piece," Martinez explained, as they prepared for the next phase. "Used the corrupted program's own resources against them. While they thought they were establishing black sites for their unauthorized operations, she was creating a secure location to compile evidence of their activities." Elena watched Ghost's focused behavior with professional admiration. The level of training required for this. Sarah must have spent months working with him, establishing these protocols. Every movement, every response had to be perfect. "And now we know why," Marcus added, his expression grim. "She wasn't just gathering evidence, she was creating an insurance policy. Something that could only be accessed under very specific circumstances, following protocols that only Ghost would know completely." The dog suddenly tensed, his attention shifting to the forest behind them. Unlike his previous alerts, this response wasn't part of his training sequence. It was a genuine warning. Moments later they heard it too. The subtle sounds of professional operators moving through the undergrowth, trying to maintain stealth, but forced to move quickly. "Security teams breaching our perimeter," Lisa reported, her equipment showing multiple approaches. "They've figured out the pattern of our movement. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they have this area completely contained." Ghost remained focused on his task, demonstrating the incredible discipline of his training. Even with immediate threats approaching, he maintained his position, clearly understanding the importance of completing Sarah's protocol exactly as she had planned it. "The facility's shielding is still active," Chen noted, checking his readings. "Multiple power sources, sophisticated security systems. Whatever Sarah left here, she made sure it would be protected until the right moment. Martinez moved decisively, her military command experience taking over. Lisa, Marcus, establish a defensive perimeter. Elena, stay with Ghost. He'll need medical monitoring after using the implant. James, with me, we need to complete this sequence exactly as Sarah planned it. The group moved with practiced efficiency, years of training kicking in as they prepared for what was coming. Ghost watched them take positions, his behavior indicating this too was within parameters of his training. Sarah had prepared him for every contingency, including the likelihood that accessing the facility would require defending it. James studied the dog's focused attention, remembering Sarah's dedication to her work with military animals. She didn't just train him for this, he realized. She made him part of the security system itself. His responses, his movements, they're not just following a protocol, they're actively interfacing with whatever she built here. Martinez nodded. Sarah knew they'd find her eventually. This was her failsafe, a way to ensure that even if they got to her, the truth couldn't be buried. Ghost isn't just carrying information, he's the key to exposing everything they tried to hide. The dog suddenly stood, moving to a new position with urgent purpose. His behavior had changed, becoming more focused, more intense. This wasn't just another step in his training. This was the crucial moment Sarah had prepared him for. Multiple vehicles approaching the quarry access road, Lisa warned. Heavy equipment, armored transport. They're mobilizing serious resources now. Ghost began a new sequence of movements, each one more precise than the last. The hidden entrance responded to his actions. Subtle changes in the rock face indicating that complex mechanisms were activating deep within the structure. Sarah's final protocol, Martinez said quietly, watching the dog work. Everything she discovered, everything she died protecting, it's all here. But we have to complete this exactly as she planned it, or we risk losing it all. The sound of branches breaking nearby brought them all to alert. Ghost maintained his focus, clearly recognizing that this moment was crucial to his mission. The dog's training had brought them to this point, and now they had to trust in Sarah's planning to see it through. Thermal signatures approaching from multiple angles, Chen reported. They're trying to establish a containment perimeter. Professional operators using advanced tactical movements. Eleanor kept close to Ghost, monitoring his condition as he worked through the complex security sequence. His vitals are elevated but stable, she reported. Whatever Sarah implanted, it's actively interfacing with the facility's systems now. The hidden entrance was responding more dramatically now. Sections of rock face shifting to reveal sophisticated technology disguised beneath the natural surface. Ghost's movements became more focused, each action triggering specific responses from the concealed systems. Sarah didn't just hide evidence here, Marcus observed, watching the facility's defenses activate. She created a self-contained intelligence hub, something that could compile and verify everything she'd discovered about their unauthorized operations. Martinez checked her weapon, her expression grim. And now we know why they were willing to kill to keep it hidden. This isn't just about falsified records or misappropriated resources. This is about exposing operations that were never supposed to exist. Ghost completed another sequence, then turned to look at James with intense focus. The dog's training had brought them to this moment, but what came next would require perfect coordination between human and canine partners. Sarah knew it would come to this, Martinez said, recognizing the significance of Ghost's behavior. The final phase of her protocol, accessing the secure facility while defending it from those who would destroy everything she died to protect. The simple act of finding a dog tied to a tree that morning had led them into something far more complex and dangerous than any of them had imagined. But now, with Ghost's unwavering guidance, they were about to uncover exactly what Sarah had discovered, and why someone had been willing to kill to keep it hidden. The hidden entrance activated with a series of precise mechanical sounds, revealing a sophisticated airlock system disguised within the rock face. Ghost maintained his position, his trained responses coordinating perfectly with the facility's security protocols. As the outer door began to cycle open, the approaching sounds of their pursuers became more urgent. "They know what this is," Martinez said grimly, watching as Ghost's movements triggered additional security measures. "This isn't just a search operation anymore. They're trying to prevent us from accessing whatever Sarah stored here." Tech Sergeant Chen's equipment suddenly displayed new alerts. "Multiple frequencies activating. The facility's defense systems are coming online. Electromagnetic shielding, signal scramblers, the works. Sarah built this place to withstand a serious assault." Eleanor kept close to Ghost, monitoring his condition as the implanted technology interfaced with the facility's systems. "His vital signs are stable but elevated," she reported. "Whatever Sarah put in that implant, it's actively communicating with the security protocols now." The outer door finished its cycle, revealing a narrow corridor that led deeper into the rock face. Ghost moved forward with purpose, his training now focused on guiding them through the facility's internal security measures. James and Martinez followed closely, while the others maintained defensive positions around the entrance. "Multiple teams approaching from the north and east," Lisa warned, checking her surveillance feeds. "They're using pincer movements, trying to cut off our escape routes. Professional operators, military-grade equipment." Inside the corridor, Ghost's behavior became even more focused. The dog moved with precise efficiency, checking specific points that triggered additional security responses. Each section of the passage required unique verification, combining Ghost's trained behaviors with whatever Sarah had implanted during his surgery. "She built this in layers," Marcus observed, his intelligence experience recognizing the sophistication of the security system. "Each level of access requires multiple forms of authentication. Even if someone managed to breach the outer defenses, they'd need Ghost's specific responses to proceed further." The corridor led them deeper into the facility, revealing more of Sarah's incredible preparation. What had appeared to be an abandoned mine shaft was actually a state-of-the-art, secure installation, carefully hidden from any external detection. "The power systems are completely self-contained," Chen reported, studying his readings. "Multiple redundant generators, shielded from any outside interference. Sarah didn't just build a hiding place, she created a fortress." Ghost suddenly stopped at what appeared to be a dead end, his posture indicating another crucial phase of his training. The dog's movements became more deliberate as he initiated a complex sequence of security checks. The wall before them responded with subtle changes, revealing sophisticated scanning systems hidden within the rock. "Biometric verification required," a computerized voice announced. The system was clearly designed to respond to specific combinations of Ghost's implant signals and trained behaviors. "Sarah's final security checkpoint," Martinez explained, watching Ghost work through the sequence. "Everything we've done so far was just getting us to this point. What's behind that door is what she died protecting." The sound of explosions from outside echoed through the corridor. Their pursuers had begun their assault on the facility's outer defenses. Ghost remained focused on his task, understanding the crucial importance of completing Sarah's protocol correctly. "Perimeter breach in sectors 3 and 4, Lisa reported through their secure communications. "They're using shaped charges to try to force entry points. Multiple teams, coordinated assault pattern." Elena monitored Ghost closely as the dog's implant interfaced with the security systems. The technology Sarah used here, it's beyond anything in current military applications. The implant isn't just sending signals, it's actively participating in a complex authentication process. The wall before them began to transform, sections sliding apart to reveal a massive vault door hidden within the rock. Ghosts trained. Responses had brought them to the heart of Sarah's secure facility, but accessing what lay beyond would require perfect execution of the final security protocols. "Sarah knew they'd find her eventually," Martinez said, her voice tight with emotion. "This wasn't just about gathering evidence, it was about creating a system that could expose everything they'd tried to hide, even after they got to her." Ghost began the final sequence of his training, each movement precisely coordinated with the vault's complex security measures. The dog's incredible discipline showed in every action, demonstrating the countless hours Sarah had spent preparing him for this crucial moment. "Multiple breach attempts now," Lisa's voice crackled through their comms. "They're using advanced thermal cutting equipment on the outer doors. The facility's defenses are holding, but they're throwing serious resources at this." Inside the main security checkpoint, Ghost's movements triggered a series of synchronized responses from the vault systems. Screens embedded in the walls came to life, displaying complex data streams that reflected the facility's active defense networks. "She built this place to be a self-contained intelligence hub," Marcus noted, studying the displays. "Something that could verify and distribute everything she'd discovered about their unauthorized operations, but only under the exact circumstances she designed." The vault door began its opening sequence, massive locking mechanisms disengaging in careful stages. Ghost maintained his position, his trained responses coordinating perfectly with each phase of the security protocol. "More teams approaching." "From the south," Chen reported, his equipment tracking the assault forces. "They're establishing a complete containment perimeter. Whatever's in that vault, they're willing to commit serious resources to prevent us from accessing it." The final security sequence required precise timing between Ghost's implant signals and his trained behaviors. Elena watched in amazement as the dog executed each movement perfectly, despite the increasing sounds of battle from the facility's outer defenses. "Sarah knew exactly what she was doing," Martinez said, her admiration evident. "She didn't just train Ghost to lead us here, she made him an integral part of the security system itself. His responses, his movements, even his implant. They're all part of a larger protocol that only he could execute." The vault door completed its cycle, revealing a chamber that demonstrated the true scope of Sarah's preparation. Banks of servers lined the walls, their displays showing active data collection and analysis. At the center of the room stood a sophisticated communications array, clearly designed to distribute information through multiple secure channels. "This is it," Marcus breathed, taking in the scale of Sarah's operation. "Everything she discovered, everything she died protecting, it's all here. A complete record of their shadow operations, ready to be exposed." Ghost moved to a specific position within the vault, his training now focused on the final phase of Sarah's protocol. The dog's behavior indicated that accessing the facility was only part of the mission. What came next would reveal exactly what Sarah had discovered and why someone had been willing to kill to keep it hidden. Multiple breaches confirmed. In the outer defenses, Lisa's voice warned through their comms. They're using specialized equipment, military-grade assault tactics. We need to complete this now. Inside the vault, Ghost's trained responses began activating Sarah's final protocols. Screens came alive with data, showing the true scope of what she had uncovered. The shadow operation using military dog programs as cover was just the beginning. What Sarah had discovered went far beyond unauthorized training facilities or misappropriated resources. She found something bigger, Martinez said grimly, watching as the displays revealed layer after layer of classified information, something that connected their false dog programs to operations that were never supposed to exist. Ghost maintained his position as the facility's systems compiled and verified Sarah's evidence. The dog's training had brought them to this crucial moment, but what they were about to uncover would shake the foundations of multiple agencies and expose operations that had been hidden for years. The simple act of finding a dog tied to a tree that morning had led them into something far larger and more dangerous than any of them had imagined. But now, with Ghost's unwavering guidance, they were about to learn exactly what Sarah had discovered, and why those behind the shadow operations had been willing to kill to keep their secrets buried. The vault systems came fully online, screens filling with data as Ghost's final security protocols activated Sarah's evidence compilation. The dog maintained his position at a specific console, his implant interfacing with the facility's computers in ways that demonstrated the true sophistication of Sarah's planning. "My God," Marcus breathed, scanning the first wave of revealed documents. "This goes way beyond falsified dog training records." Sarah uncovered an entire shadow network operating within multiple agencies. Colonel Martinez moved quickly between displays, her military experience helping her piece together the scope of what they were seeing. They weren't just using the dog program as cover, they were using it to create completely fictional units, training facilities that only existed on paper. The perfect cover for moving personnel and resources without oversight. The facility shook with another explosion from outside, but Ghost remained steady, his training focused on completing Sarah's final protocol. Elena monitored him closely, amazed at how the dog maintained his discipline despite the chaos around them. "Multiple teams have breached the outer security perimeter." Lisa's voice crackled through their comms. "They're using specialized equipment to bypass Sarah's defensive systems, heavy weapons, military-grade breaching charges." Inside the vault, the evidence Sarah had compiled painted an increasingly disturbing picture. What had started as irregularities in military working dog program, records had led her to discover something far more sinister. "Look at these transfer orders," James said, studying one screen. They use the dog program's documentation to move entire specialized units off the books, created paper trails for operations that were never officially authorized. "Tech Sergeant, Chen's equipment suddenly registered new alerts. The facility's systems are activating additional protocols, some kind of automated distribution network. Sarah built this place to do more than just store evidence." Ghost moved to another console, his trained responses triggering new sequences in Sarah's security system. The screens shifted to display complex financial records showing how the shadow operation had used the military working dog program's budget to fund their unauthorized activities. They created an entire parallel structure, Marcus explained, his intelligence experience helping him decode the patterns, used the legitimate aspects of the dog program to hide something much bigger. Training facilities that were really staging areas, transport missions that moved more than just animals. Martinez nodded grimly. Sarah found their weak point, the one place where they had to maintain detailed documentation. Military working dogs require extensive records, training logs, medical histories, deployment data. By creating fictional dogs and units, they could justify moving anything anywhere. The Vault's communications array suddenly activated, responding to Ghost's continued security protocols. The dog's training had anticipated this moment, his movements coordinating perfectly with the facility's systems. "She's set up secured transmission channels," Chen reported, checking his equipment. "Multiple redundant systems, each one designed to distribute specific pieces of evidence to different agencies and oversight committees." "Sarah knew they'd try to bury this," Martinez said, watching as Ghost's actions triggered new sequences in the facility's computers. "She didn't just gather evidence, she created a system that could expose everything, even if they managed to compromise individual agencies." Another explosion rocked the facility, closer this time. Lisa's voice came through their comms with increased urgency. "They're through the second security perimeter, multiple teams using coordinated assault patterns. These aren't regular military units. They're something else." Inside the vault, the screens displayed more of what Sarah had discovered. Ghost moved between consoles with trained precision, each action revealing new layers of evidence about the Shadow operations activities. "These aren't just unauthorized missions," Marcus said, his expression growing darker as he studied the data. "They were using the dog program's infrastructure to support operations that violated multiple international laws. Black sites disguised as training facilities, interrogation programs hidden behind canine medical records." Elena kept close to Ghost, monitoring his vital signs as the implant continued interfacing with Sarah's systems. "The technology she used here, it's beyond anything in current military applications. She found a way to make Ghost's responses part of the security architecture itself." The facility's defensive systems reported more breaches, but Ghost remained focused on his task. The dog's training had prepared him for this moment, each action perfectly coordinated with Sarah's carefully designed protocols. "Look at these deployment records," James said, pointing to one screen. "They created entire fictional K-9 units, complete with detailed training histories and mission logs. But the dogs never existed. They were cover for moving specialized teams into restricted areas." Martinez studied the documents with growing concern. Sarah found a pattern. Every time they needed to operate outside normal channels, they'd create a new dog unit. The documentation requirements gave them perfect cover. Who would question detailed records about military working dog deployments? Ghost suddenly moved to a new position, triggering what appeared to be Sarah's final security sequence. The Vault systems responded with increased activity, compiling and organizing the evidence into multiple secure packages. "She's built in fail-safes," Chen noted, watching the data streams. "Each transmission package is designed to corroborate the others. Even if they manage to intercept some of the evidence, they can't stop all of it from getting out." The sound of breaching charges grew closer, but Ghost maintained his focus. The dog's incredible training showed in every movement as he worked through Sarah's carefully designed protocols. "Multiple teams converging on our position," Lisa warned through the comms. "They're using some kind of advanced electronic warfare equipment, trying to jam our communications, disable Sarah's security systems." Inside the vault, the full scope of what Sarah had discovered continued to unfold across the screens. Ghost's actions had triggered a comprehensive data compilation, revealing the true nature of the Shadow operations activities. They didn't Just hide their operations, Marcus said quietly, studying the evidence. They created an entire parallel command structure. Used the dog program's legitimate status to move people, equipment, and resources without any official oversight. Martinez nodded grimly. And when Sarah started putting the pieces together, they realized their whole system was at risk. One person who understood both military working dog programs and intelligence operations, she was uniquely positioned to expose everything. The facility shook with another explosion, but Ghost's trained responses never wavered. The dog moved between consoles with practiced efficiency, each action bringing them closer to completing Sarah's final protocol. The distribution network is almost ready, Chen reported, monitoring the system's status. Sarah designed it to transmit everything simultaneously through multiple secure channels. Once it starts, they won't be able to stop the information from getting out. Elena watched Ghost work, amazed at the complexity of his training. Sarah didn't just teach him to lead us here. She made him an essential part of the security system. His responses, his implant, even his movements. They're all necessary to complete the protocol. The vault's displays showed the final compilation of Sarah's evidence, revealing the true scope of what she had discovered. The shadow operation had used the military working dog program's legitimate status to create a hidden network of unauthorized activities, operating beyond any official oversight or accountability. She found their entire infrastructure, James said, understanding now why Sarah had gone to such lengths to protect this information. Every fake dog unit, every falsified training record, every unauthorized operation they tried to hide, she documented all of it. Ghost moved to his final position, triggering the last phase of Sarah's security protocol. The facility's systems responded with increased activity, preparing to distribute the evidence through multiple secure channels. Massive breach in the main corridor, Lisa's voice warned urgently. Multiple teams with heavy equipment. They're throwing everything they have at stopping us now. But Ghost remained steady, his training focused on completing the mission Sarah had prepared him for. The simple act of finding him tied to a tree that morning had led them to this moment. The exposure of a shadow operation that had operated with impunity for years. The dog's unwavering discipline, even in the face of increasing danger, showed just how thoroughly Sarah had prepared him for this crucial task. Everything she had discovered, everything she had died protecting, was about to be revealed. The truth she had sacrificed herself to expose would finally come to light, thanks to the incredible partnership between a dedicated handler and her loyal military working dog. The vault's transmission systems hummed to life as Ghost's final security protocols initiated Sarah's carefully planned distribution sequence. Multiple screens showed the progress of data packages being prepared for simultaneous release through secure channels, each one containing pieces of the evidence she had died protecting. Breach teams at multiple points now. Lisa's urgent voice came through their comms. They're using some kind of advanced electronic warfare equipment, trying to jam the facility's communications, but Sarah's shielding is holding. Ghost maintained his position at the primary console, his implant interfacing with the facility's systems in ways that demonstrated the true sophistication of Sarah's planning. The dog's trained responses were coordinating perfectly with each phase of the transmission preparation. "Look at this," Marcus said, studying one of the screens. Sarah didn't just document their shadow operations. She traced everything back to its source, found the people who authorized the creation of fictional dog units, tracked every false training record to the individuals who created it. Colonel Martinez moved between displays, her expression hardening as she saw the full scope of what Sarah had uncovered. They built an entire parallel command structure, used the military working dog program's legitimate status to create a network of unauthorized operations, all of it hidden behind layers of seemingly routine documentation. The facility shook with another explosion, closer now. But Ghost never wavered from his task. Elena monitored him closely, amazed at how the dog maintained his focus despite the increasing chaos around them. His vital signs are elevated but stable, she reported. Whatever Sarah implanted, it's fully integrated with his nervous system. The technology she used here, it's years ahead of anything currently in development. Tech Sergeant Chen's equipment suddenly registered new alerts. They're trying to breach the facility's electromagnetic shielding using some kind of focused EMP device to disrupt our systems. Sarah planned for that too, Martinez said, watching as Ghost's movements triggered additional security protocols. Look at how the facility's defenses are adapting. She built in multiple layers of protection, each one designed to counter specific types of attacks. James studied the screens, showing the compilation of Sarah's evidence, understanding now why she had gone to such elaborate lengths to protect it. The shadow operation wasn't just using the dog program for cover, they were exploiting every aspect of it. Created fictional training facilities that were really staging areas for unauthorized missions, used canine medical records to hide interrogation programs. Multiple breach points confirmed, Lisa warned through the comms. They're using shaped charges to create entry routes. Professional teams, military-grade equipment. These aren't regular operators. They're something else entirely. Inside the vault, Ghost moved to trigger another phase of Sarah's protocol. The screens shifted to display complex financial records, showing how the shadow operation had funneled massive resources through the legitimate military working dog program. They created a perfect cover, Marcus explained, his intelligence, experience helping him decode the patterns. Military working dogs require extensive documentation, training records, medical histories, deployment logs. By creating fictional units, they could justify moving anything anywhere without raising suspicions. Martinez nodded grimly. And when Sarah started investigating discrepancies in the program's records, she found something they never expected. A trail that led straight to operations that weren't supposed to exist. The Vault systems continued preparing data packages for transmission, each one carefully designed to expose different aspects of the shadow operations activities. Ghost's trained responses coordinated perfectly with the facility's security protocols, demonstrating the incredible complexity of Sarah's planning. The distribution network is almost ready, Chen reported, monitoring the system's status. Sarah designed it to transmit simultaneously through multiple secure channels. Once it starts, they won't be able to stop all the information from getting out. Another explosion rocked the facility, and this time Lisa's voice came through with increased urgency. They've breached the main security corridor. Multiple teams moving in with heavy equipment. Whatever they're using, it's not standard military gear. Ghost suddenly moved to a new position, his behavior indicating another crucial phase of his training. The dog's movements triggered additional displays, revealing more of what Sarah had discovered about the shadow operation's true nature. These aren't just unauthorized missions, James said, studying the new data. They were using the dog program's infrastructure to support operations that violated multiple international laws, created paper trails for activities that were never meant to be documented. Elena kept close to Ghost, monitoring his condition. As the implant continued interfacing with Sarah's systems, His training is incredible. Even under this kind of stress, he's executing every protocol perfectly. Sarah must have spent months preparing him for this exact scenario. The facility's defenses reported more breaches, but Ghost remained focused on his task. The screens showed the final compilation of evidence, revealing the full scope of what Sarah had uncovered. "She found their entire network," Martinez said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Every false record, every unauthorized operation, every person involved in creating and maintaining the shadow program. She documented all of it. And now we know why they killed her," Marcus added grimly. "This isn't just about exposing unauthorized operations. This evidence implicates people at the highest levels, shows how they used legitimate military programs to hide activities that were never officially sanctioned." Ghost suddenly tensed, his trained responses indicating a new threat. Moments later, they heard it too, the sound of specialized breaching, equipment being used on the vault's outer doors. "Multiple teams converging on our position," Lisa reported urgently. "They're using some kind of advanced tech to bypass Sarah's security systems. Whatever they're throwing at us now, it's beyond anything we've seen before." Inside the vault, the transmission system entered its final preparation phase. Ghost moved with increased purpose, his training now focused on completing Sarah's protocol. Before the facility could be compromised, "The distribution network is primed," Chen confirmed, checking his equipment. "Sarah built in redundant systems. Even if they manage to breach the vault, they can't stop all the transmissions once they start." Martinez studied the dog's focused movements with professional admiration. Sarah knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't just train Ghost to lead us here, she made him an integral part of the security system itself. His responses, his implant, everything about him was prepared for this moment. The vault's outer doors began to show signs of stress as the breach teams intensified their assault. Ghost maintained his position at the primary console, his training never wavering, despite the increasing danger. "They're throwing everything they have at stopping us now," Lisa warned. "Multiple teams, coordinated assault pattern. These aren't regular military units. They're something else entirely." James moved to check the vault's secondary defenses, his military experience recognizing the sophistication of the attack. "They know what's in here, know that once Sarah's evidence gets out, their entire shadow operation will be exposed." Ghost suddenly began a new sequence of movements, his behavior indicating the final phase of Sarah's protocol. The facility's systems responded with increased activity, preparing to distribute the evidence through multiple secure channels. "This is it," Martinez said, watching as the transmission system entered its launch sequence. Everything Sarah discovered, everything she died protecting, it's all about to come out. They can breach the vault, but they can't stop what's about to happen. The simple act of finding Ghost, tied to a tree that morning, had led them to this moment. The exposure of a shadow operation that had operated with impunity for years. The dog's unwavering discipline, even in the face of imminent danger, showed just how thoroughly Sarah had prepared him for this crucial task. As the vault's outer doors began to fail under the assault, Ghost remained steady at his post. The truth Sarah had sacrificed herself to expose was about to be revealed, thanks to the incredible partnership between a dedicated handler and her loyal military working dog. The shadow operations' days of operating in darkness were about to end, brought down by the very program they had tried to exploit. The vault's reinforced doors groaned under the sustained assault as Ghost initiated the final phase of Sarah's protocol, The facility's transmission systems had reached full power, ready to distribute the evidence through multiple secure channels. The dog maintained perfect position at the primary console, his training focused on completing the mission his handler had died to protect. "Breach imminent," Lisa's voice crackled through their comms. "Multiple teams using specialized equipment. They've got something that's cutting through Sarah's security measures faster than should be possible." Colonel Martinez moved quickly between defensive positions, her military experience guiding their last-minute preparations. "Ghost needs 3 more minutes to complete the transmission sequence. We hold until then, no matter what comes through those doors." The dog's implant continued interfacing with Sarah's systems, coordinating the complex distribution of evidence that would expose the Shadow Operations' entire network. Elena monitored Ghost's vital signs, amazed at his unwavering focus, despite the chaos around them. "His neural patterns are incredibly stable," she reported. "Sarah's implant technology. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The integration with his nervous system is beyond current medical understanding." Tech Sergeant Chen's equipment suddenly registered new alerts. "They're trying to jam our transmission frequencies, but Sarah's shielding is adapting. The facilities' systems are automatically switching to alternate channels faster than they can block them." The vault's outer doors began to glow red-hot as the breach teams intensified their assault. Ghost never wavered from his position, his trained responses, perfectly coordinated with each phase of the transmission preparation. "Look at this," Marcus said, studying the final data compilation. "Sarah didn't just document their unauthorized operations. She traced everything back to its source. Found connections to people who should never have been involved in military programs." James moved between defensive positions, his combat experience telling him they had precious little time. The Shadow Operation wasn't just using the dog program for cover. They were using it to create completely deniable operations, things that were never meant to see daylight. The facility shook with another explosion, closer now than ever. Through the vault's reinforced walls, they could hear the breach teams, deploying their final assault equipment. "Multiple points of entry," Lisa warned. "They're setting up for a coordinated breach. These aren't regular operators. Their gear, their tactics. They're something else entirely." Ghost suddenly shifted position, triggering what appeared to be the last phase of Sarah's security protocol. The vault systems responded with increased activity, preparing for the final transmission sequence. "She built in triple redundancy," Chen noted, watching the data streams. "Even if they manage to shut down some transmission channels, others will automatically activate. Sarah made sure this evidence would get out one way or another." Martinez studied the dog's focused movements with grim appreciation. This is what she trained him for. Every protocol, every security measure, it all depended on Ghost's ability to maintain absolute discipline under extreme conditions. The vault's outer doors began to buckle under the assault, but Ghost remained steady at his post. Elena kept close to him, monitoring his condition as the implant interfaced with the facility's systems. Sarah knew exactly what she was doing, she said softly. The implant isn't just communicating with the security systems, it's actively adapting to counter their attempts to breach the facility's defenses. Another explosion rocked the vault, and this time the outer doors showed signs of imminent failure. James and Martinez took up final defensive positions while Marcus and Chen worked to protect the transmission equipment. 30 seconds to complete, Data distribution, Chen reported, checking his instruments. Sarah's evidence is being prepared for simultaneous release through multiple secure channels. The breach teams made their final push, specialized equipment cutting through the vault's reinforced doors with frightening efficiency. Ghost maintained his position, his training focused on completing Sarah's protocol regardless of the immediate danger. "They're about to break through," Lisa warned. "Multiple teams, heavy weapons. Whatever happens, they're determined to stop these transmissions." The Vault's systems entered their final countdown as Ghost triggered the last security sequence. Screens showed data packages being prepared for distribution, each one containing pieces of the evidence Sarah had died protecting. "This is what she sacrificed everything for," Martinez said, watching the transmission preparation. "Proof of operations that were never meant to exist. Evidence that could bring down people at the highest levels." The outer doors finally gave way with a thunderous crash, and armored figures began pouring into the vault. Their equipment was unlike anything standard military units used. Clear evidence of the Shadow operation's extensive resources. But they were too late. Ghost's final trained response activated Sarah's transmission sequence just as the breach teams entered the vault. The facility's systems came alive with activity, sending the compiled evidence through multiple secure channels simultaneously. "Transmissions confirmed," Chen called out, monitoring the data streams. "Multiple packages, different secure channels. They're going out faster than they can be blocked." The breach team's leader seemed to realize what was happening, ordering his men to target the transmission equipment. But Sarah had planned for this, too. Ghost suddenly moved from his position, executing a trained response that triggered the facility's final protocol. Emergency systems activated, creating secure barriers between sections of the vault, while the transmission continued through hidden backup channels. "Sarah's fail-safe protocol," Martinez explained, watching the dog's precise movements. "Even if they destroy the main systems, the evidence is still going out through secondary channels they can't trace." The breach teams found themselves cut off from critical equipment by Sarah's security measures, their specialized gear useless against protocols they hadn't known existed. Ghost maintained his disciplined response, coordinating perfectly with the facility's defense systems. "Multiple transmissions confirmed successful," Chen reported triumphantly. "The evidence is out. Multiple agencies, oversight committees, secure channels they can't control. Sarah's protocol worked exactly as she planned." The breach team's leader seemed to realize the futility of their position. With the evidence already transmitted, their mission had failed. The Shadow operation's carefully maintained secrecy was about to be shattered. "Stand down!" a new voice commanded from the vault's entrance. A figure in formal military dress stepped through the smoke, his insignia indicating senior command rank. "The operation is compromised. Containment protocols are no longer viable." Colonel Martinez recognized him immediately. "General Harrison, I should have known you'd be involved in this." The general's expression was grim as he surveyed the vault. "We did what we thought was necessary, used the dog program's legitimate status to conduct operations that needed to remain hidden. Sarah Connor wasn't supposed to find the connections." "But she did," James said, moving to stand protectively near Ghost. "Found every false record, every unauthorized mission, documented everything you tried to hide." Ghost maintained his alert but calm demeanor, his training holding even in this tense moment. The dog's unwavering discipline was a testament to Sarah's incredible preparation. "She was more thorough than anyone expected," General Harrison admitted. "When we realized what she'd discovered, how much evidence she'd compiled, we tried to contain it. But she was always one step ahead." Of us. She knew you'd find her eventually, Martina said, her voice hard. That's why she created all this, trained Ghost to execute a protocol that would expose everything even after you got to her. The general nodded slowly. We underestimated her dedication. Thought eliminating her would be enough to bury what she'd found. Never imagined she'd create something like this, a failsafe that could only be activated under exact circumstances, using a dog's trained responses as the key. The facility's systems continued transmitting data through secure channels, distributing Sarah's evidence to carefully chosen recipients. Ghost remained focused on his task, completing the mission his handler had sacrificed everything to prepare for. It's over, Martinez stated firmly. Sarah's evidence is already out there, being verified by multiple agencies. Your shadow operation is finished. General Harrison seemed to age years in that moment, the weight of exposed secrets evident in his bearing. You have no idea what you've done. The operations we conducted, they were necessary, things the public was never meant to know about. That wasn't your decision to make, James responded, watching as Ghost maintained his trained position. You used a legitimate military program as cover for unauthorized operations. Sarah gave her life to expose that truth. The facility's transmission systems began powering down, their task complete. Ghost finally relaxed slightly, his mission accomplished. Eleanor moved to check his condition, while Chen confirmed the successful distribution of all data packages. Multiple agencies are already acknowledging receipt of the evidence, Marcus reported, monitoring communications channels. Sarah's documentation is being verified. Investigations are being initiated. The breach teams began standing down, their specialized equipment now useless against protocols that had already completed their task. The shadow operations' carefully maintained secrecy had been shattered by the very program they had tried to exploit. Ghost completed his mission, Martinez said, watching as Elena tended to the dog. Exactly as Sarah trained him, she knew the evidence had to come out, no matter the cost. The simple act of finding a dog tied to a tree that morning had led them to this moment, the exposure of operations that were never meant to see daylight. Ghost's unwavering discipline, his perfect execution of Sarah's protocols, had ensured that the truth could no longer remain hidden. As the facility's systems completed their final sequences, James knelt beside Ghost, gently checking the dog's tactical collar where it all began. The military tags that had started this journey caught the vault's light, a reminder of the handler who had sacrificed everything to expose the truth. "She'd be proud of you, boy," he said softly, Ghost's tail giving a slight wag at the praise. "You completed the mission, finished what she started." The shadow operations' days of operating in darkness were over, brought down by the incredible partnership between a dedicated handler and her loyal military working dog. Sarah's sacrifice had not been in vain. The truth she had died protecting would finally see the light of day, thanks to the unwavering dedication of a dog who had been trained for one final crucial mission. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.